Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price and today I want to share my 7 predictions for Smash Up in 2022. It's a new year, so it's a new chance for content, and I was originally planning on sharing this list in our 500th video, but for various reasons I have moved it up. I made this list back in December and have been mulling over it ever since. Now, there's a good portion of our viewer base that knows whether I'm right or wrong in this video, and those people should not say anything. Don't even acknowledge that you know. We'll find out in 2023 how well this video aged, and it's okay for me to be wrong because that's half the fun. These are educated guesses. And for each entry, I'll explain why it's likely and why it's not to the best extent possible. So let's take it the first prediction, which many other predictions are built upon. We know another licensed expansion is coming, but I'm going to say that it is an 8-faction, non-Marvel, standalone set, but most notably for this prediction, it will not be announced until its availability is imminent. Let's break down each part as some are more gimme than others. We know that there is licensed content coming, but they didn't say it's Marvel, and because they didn't say it, it can't be Marvel. Otherwise, why play coy? I think it will be 8 factions and standalone for the same reasons that Marvel was standalone. And by standalone, I don't mean keep it in a separate box. I mean that you can buy it as your first 4-player entry, despite being fully compatible with the core game, like Dominion and Dominion Intrigue. I see this expansion marketed as another entry point to bring in new players, just with a different license, and I also think that the 8-faction approach makes more sense in the current climate. It's hard for retailers to stock expansions because it's a ton of inventory, but a standalone game doesn't have that same problem. With shipping prices and delays going through the roof, despite it taking up more physical space on a container because of a larger box, I do think that 1 box of 8 is easier to freight than 2 boxes of 4 currently, and it makes better use of card sheet efficiency when you're printing out the game. So for all these reasons, 8 makes more sense. But why delay the announcement? I think they want to avoid what happened with Marvel, and specifically that they want to capitalize on momentum. I could see a release at Origins or Gen Con where they can capitalize on opportunity and not get drowned out by impossible to predict timings caused by freight delays. I don't think players realize how terrible freighting is right now, as it's caused publishers to rethink everything, and there's little upside to saying, this is coming, but we don't know when. So I could see a strategy where it arrives, is held, and a physical release coincides with a major event. This to me would be the best way to not compete with the heavy market saturation. While licensed factions always invite a mixed response, my next prediction is fairly safe. Not all factions released in 2022 will be licensed. This to me is a matter of necessity for 3 reasons. First and foremost, it's what many players want. Even players who like licensed content want the mainline stream to continue. Second, to me, this is how AEG maintains control of their flagship game. If everything is produced by the op, it sends a message implying that the op is in control, which I doubt they want. It's a partnership, not a divestiture. Third, this is the only way that the new mechanics can be introduced, and it's been a while since we have one, which is penguins, which is really just a formalization of something in the game already. To explain why that is, I'll go ahead and make my third prediction, which is that we will see a new mechanic in an unlicensed faction in 2022. Not only are we overdue, but unlicensed factions are the only way possible. When you look at Marvel, it introduced nothing new mechanics-wise. In fact, it omitted several mechanics, not just power counters. If I'm right about prediction 1, it would take the same route, which is a fresh take on familiar themes, because they'd want to keep the complexity down and limit rulebook density. One of the things that I've learned over the last few years is how much publishers want to limit the page counts of their rulebooks for more reasons than you'd think. I'd be shocked to see the new mechanics in a licensed faction for a new audience, so it'd have to be elsewhere, and that is within the licensed factions, and I do think one is coming this year. Also, reading between the lines of a comment I got, I think that this is the case. What would make it unlikely is if we were getting more standalone factions, because historically they haven't included any rule sets, and one would be obviously needed here. But I do think that that is a solvable problem, so I'm not too worried about it. But with my fourth prediction, I think we will see a returning mechanic, and that's burying. Why do I think this? Because for years fans have been asking for a return to some of the lesser used mechanics, with Madness, Monsters, Burying, and Dueling often cited as the big 4 due for a return. While Madness and Monsters both have dependencies on other expansions, one of which has lost its license, and both are among the least popular expansions, making it harder to revisit that mechanic unless you absorb the duplication of assets. Burying and Dueling require no dependencies on cards, only on the rulebook, and both are in the big rulebook, which is technically needed for knights anyway. Between the two, I think burying is the more likely option because it was used less, doesn't slow the game down, is much easier to understand, and is the one that doesn't suck. While you can explore dueling again, it's really always going to be these two minions duel at this time, then do X. Burying has a deeper design space, and I'm betting on that making a comeback in 2022. Before we end on two big predictions, I want to segue into a smaller one, and that is that the destruction loophole will be closed in 2022 for good. I've been thinking this for a while, and if I see another evidence of it, I'll definitely feel it's confirmed. Previously, a lot of destroy cards lacked the keyword 2, which came out in Monster, which meant that if a card couldn't be destroyed, you could cheat. Then Link Destruction came in Monster, but since 2019, destruction phrasing has gotten tighter and tighter, making me think that the game wants to get away from cheap destruction avoidance. Compare cards like Battle Moose and Excalibur, which prevent other players from doing the destruction, with previous cards that outright prevent destruction. This is also true in Marvel. While Hydra would be even more insane if they had this benefit, it's worth noting that Hell Hydra has Link Destruction despite being a well-established card previously in Sacrifice and Catfight. I'm basically making this prediction on the assumption that, with at least 8 expected factions, this is bound to come up again, and if new cards don't produce the same effect, I will interpret this as being correct. This is slightly related to my 6th prediction, which is that the 10th Anniversary Collection, regardless of what they do, will contain errata. It's impossible to say how big of a deal the 10th anniversary will be, but there are two main considerations. For it to truly feel like an anniversary, it needs to connect to the past, not just be new stuff in an expansion. There could be new stuff in addition, but then it'd have to be supplementary. We need something looking backwards. And it needs to be game assets, not just swag, even though swag is cool. To me, there are only 4 ways to do this, all of which have a high chance for errata, and I've included them in no particular order since people are going to ask me anyway. The first is a core set 2nd edition, where errata is inevitable, because that's kind of the whole point. The second is to create more titans, in which case it would be indefensible not to errata certain titans. The third is to do a rulebook cleanup and refresh, and if that includes no new errata, that's irresponsible because there are definitely open questions. Finally, if they did a second All-Stars faction, depending on what minions they use, there is a chance for errata to make sure that the cards work in their new context. The chance of errata is indeterminate because there are a lot of cards to choose from, but still fairly high, and given that they can do any number of these things, I'm expecting some form of errata. Does that mean that the cards are actually printed? It's impossible to say, but I'd lean no since it didn't happen the first time, but that's not part of this prediction. My final prediction is perhaps the biggest one, and that is that 2022 will see the announcement of a plan to get to 100 factions. It doesn't have to include details on how or when, but if I'm right that we will see at least 8 this year, that puts us at 92, one 8-faction expansion away from 100. And I personally feel that if you are so close to that number, you have to go for it, if not just for completionist's sake. After that point, things start getting pretty unmanageable. I think the odds of getting to 100 in 2022 is really slim, especially with all the COVID and freighting delays. But there's something special about saying 10 years, 100 factions, so that's why I think they will acknowledge a plan, even if they don't execute it, because it'd be a great milestone to hit. I think you run out of space before you run out of ideas. Not everything that can exist should or will exist, especially with changes to AEG's business model and the industry in general, but this is one of those opportunities that's too good to pass up. So in 2022, you'll see an announcement for a plan for how to get to 100 factions. I feel good about these predictions, though I'm certainly open to being wrong, because that's half the fun. And we certainly have the groundwork for everything to go haywire because of COVID. I guess we will find out in 2023. What are your predictions for this year, and how strongly do you feel about them? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.